The Wyoming prairie had turned the color of old bone. Heat shimmered above the earth, and the wind that moved through the tall grass felt as dry as ash. Somewhere beyond the hills, a hawk cried once and was gone, swallowed by the silence of late summer. Zara Hayes shaded her eyes with a calloused hand. She'd walked the half-mile from her father's house to the well, carrying the same dented bucket she'd used since she was a girl. The rope burned against her palm as she pulled the water up, muscles trembling from the weight. The sound of it sloshing was almost music. These days, water was the only thing that still made her smile. She poured a little into her canteen, then started back across the pasture. The ground cracked beneath her boots. Her father's cattle hadn't survived the last drought, and even the hardy sagebrush looked ready to give up. Zara had grown used to that kind of quiet, the emptiness that followed loss. Halfway home, she saw him. At first she thought it was a bundle of rags, or maybe a dead steer, half covered by dust. Then the shape moved. A man lay face down beside a patch of buffalo grass, his skin burnt red, his shirt torn and stiff with sweat. His wrists were raw, marked with deep, angry welts, the kind of scars left by chains after too many days of struggle. Zara froze. The stories came back to her, the ones folks told about Apache prisoners escaping from the army camps down south. Killers, thieves, savage men who cut throats and vanished into the desert. She should have turned away. Any sensible woman would have. But something in the way his fingers twitched, like he was still fighting to live, made her step closer. "Sir," she called softly. No answer. She knelt beside him, brushing dust from his face. His lips were cracked, his breath shallow but alive. The canteen weighed heavy against her hip. She hesitated only a moment before uncapping it and pressing it to his mouth. The man's eyes fluttered open, dark, unfocused, the color of wet earth. He drank greedily, then coughed, spilling water down his chin. Zara let him take another swallow before pulling the canteen back. "Easy," she murmured, though she wasn't sure why she spoke at all. He probably didn't understand her. Behind her, a voice thundered across the field. Zara flinched and turned. Her father, Jace Wilder, strode toward her the way men carried their certainty. "What in God's name are you doing?" he barked when he reached her. His eyes dropped to the man on the ground, and all the color drained from his face. "Step away, Zara." "But he's dying, Pa." "Step away." His voice cracked like a whip. "That's an Apache." The word hung between them, heavy as judgment. Zara looked down at the man again, his thick black hair matted with dirt, his copper skin, the old scars along his arm. She didn't need her father to tell her what he was. "He's still a man," she whispered. Jace lowered the rifle, his jaw tightening. "You don't know what you're saying. You help him and the soldiers will hang you right beside him. They'd hang me for giving water. They'd hang you for mercy in the wrong direction." He spat into the dirt. "Leave him, Zara. He ain't your burden." He turned and started back toward the house. Zara stayed where she was, the heat pressing down like a punishment. The man on the ground moaned faintly, reaching for the canteen again. Her throat ached. She remembered her mother lying on the wagon trail years ago, lips cracked and whispering for water that never came. Strangers had passed them by, afraid of the sickness that followed drought. "Keep walking," they'd said. "You can't save everyone." Maybe not, Zara thought, but she could save one. She poured the last of her water over the man's lips and made her choice. Getting him home was near impossible. He was tall, heavy with muscle, even in weakness, and every time she dragged him forward through the dust, he groaned low in his throat. Sweat stung her eyes, her arms shook, but she kept pulling until the outline of the barn appeared through the wavering heat. Her father's house stood a few hundred yards beyond, 2 rooms, a crooked porch, a lifetime of hard work. The small grain cellar under the floorboards had once held sacks of barley, back when rain still fell. Her father almost never went down there anymore. She managed to get the stranger inside by half dragging, half rolling him through the cellar door. He hit the dirt floor with a dull thud and didn't stir. Zara knelt beside him, panting. The air smelled of dust and old grain. "You'll be safe here," she said quietly, though her hands were shaking. "Just don't make a sound." He didn't answer. His eyes had closed again, his chest rising and falling in a shallow rhythm. Above them, the wind moaned through the boards of the house. Zara closed the cellar door, sealing him in shadow. Then she leaned her back against it, listening to her heartbeat fast and frightened. Outside, her father's hammer struck wood somewhere in the yard, steady and unknowing. Zara Hayes looked down at her blistered palms, still damp from the rope and the canteen. She had told herself she'd done the right thing. But as she wiped the dust from her face and heard the echo of her father's warning, "They'll hang you for mercy in the wrong direction," she wondered if goodness truly came without a price. The cellar stayed cool, even in the worst of summer. Dust motes drifted through the cracks above, catching slants of light that leaked through the floorboards. Zara moved quietly, always listening for her father's footsteps. For 3 days, the man slept like a stone. Sometimes he muttered in another tongue, soft and rhythmic, like prayers carried on the wind. Each time she pressed a damp rag to his lips, coaxing him to swallow. His fever came and went. When she unwrapped the cloth around his wrist, she saw the deep, raw grooves the iron chains had left. It made her stomach twist. Outside, the army patrols rode by almost every evening. They came from the south road, 4 or 5 riders in a cloud of dust, scanning every field and ravine. Zara would hear their voices calling out for escaped hostiles. Jace Wilder would stand on the porch until they passed, grumbling that trouble was never far enough away. She made excuses to stay near the house, said defenses needed checking, said she had sewing to mend. Each lie came easier than the last, though each one burned more when she told it. On the 4th night, she carried a lantern down to the cellar. The man was awake. He sat propped against the dirt wall. His face was hollow under the flickering light. His eyes found her immediately, sharp, dark, unafraid. For a heartbeat, she thought he might spring at her. Instead, he watched her the way a wolf watches thunder, cautious measuring. "You're awake!" She said the word, sounding foolish in her own ears. He didn't answer. His gaze slid from her face to the lantern, then to the bandages around his wrists. "You're safe," she added. "No one comes down here." Still nothing. She knelt and handed him the tin cup she'd filled with water. He hesitated, then took it, his fingers brushing hers. They were rough and hot. He drank slowly this time, eyes never leaving hers. When he handed the cup back, his voice came out low and broken. "Why?" It was one word, but heavy enough to fill the whole cellar. "Because you needed help." His brow furrowed as if that answer made no sense. He pointed toward the ceiling, toward the sound of boots thumping above. "Your father," he said. "He knows." She shook her head. He gave a weary half-laugh, bitter as dust. "You bring death here." "No," she said quickly. "I brought you life." He looked away, muttering something under his breath. Apache, maybe a prayer. Zara could only make out one word that sounded like she, a sound that rolled and fell like wind through reeds. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated before answering. "Koa. Koa," she repeated softly, trying the shape of it. "I'm Zara." He didn't say it back, but a flicker crossed his face like a ripple through still water. Over the next days, she returned often. Always with small things, bread, dried beans, bits of jerky. He ate sparingly, careful not to take too much. Sometimes when she opened the cellar door, she'd find him standing near the sliver of light, eyes closed, breathing, as though he could feel the outside through the cracks. One evening he asked, "How long I stay here?" "Until it's safe," she said. He gave a dry smile. "Safe for me, never safe." "Then until you're strong enough to go." He studied her a long moment. "You risk much, Zara." She shrugged. "Maybe I'm tired of being afraid." That seemed to puzzle him. He stared at the lantern flame between them. Afraid of what? Everything, she said. The drought, the soldiers, the way people hate without knowing why. He nodded once, a small movement that meant he understood. My people say hate is the child of hunger, he said slowly. When the belly is empty too long, the heart eats itself. Just the simplicity of it struck her harder than any sermon. Another day, while she was upstairs scrubbing laundry, hoofbeats thundered past the house. She hurried to the window. Soldiers again, 6 of them this time. Her father stepped out to speak with the sergeant. Zara caught fragments of the talk through the open window. Apache prisoner escaped 3 days ago. A dangerous man. If you see tracks, send word. Jace nodded, his eyes narrowed. Ain't seen nobody. Just my girl and me. Zara held her breath until the riders disappeared over the ridge. Her knees went weak. She was sure her father could hear her heart pounding in the quiet night. That evening she slipped into the cellar to warn Koa. But he already knew. I heard horses, he said. They're searching. They won't find you, she promised. Koa looked at her, half smiling. You lie to them. You lie for me, why? Zara Hayes didn't have an answer ready. She could feel the heat of his gaze, the quiet steadiness of it. Because my mother used to say every life's worth a try, she said finally. She died asking for water and no one stopped to give it. I won't be that kind of person. Koa's expression softened, but his voice stayed solemn. If they find me here, you die too. Then I die knowing I did what's right. For the first time, he looked away first. Days passed in a fragile rhythm. Zara worked the fields with her father, listening to the wind for distant hoofbeats. At night, she snuck food down, sometimes sitting in silence with the man she'd saved. He told her fragments of his story. How soldiers came to his village at dawn, how the women were taken, the men forced to work, building roads that would never belong to them. When he spoke, his voice held no hatred, only weariness. They call it law, he said once. We call it forgetting. Zara didn't know what to say. Words seemed too small beside his quiet grief. One evening, after sunset, she brought her lantern again. The cellar smelled of rain that never came. Koa was sitting up, carving something into a piece of wood with a small knife he must have kept hidden. When he saw her, he stopped embarrassed. What are you making? She asked. He held it out. A small bird, wings spread wide. Not perfect, but alive somehow, as if ready to take flight. For you, he said simply. Zara turned it in her hands, the wood warm from his touch. She felt something shift inside her, soft, frightening, undeniable. Above them, floorboards creaked. Her father's voice drifted through the cracks, calling her name. Zara, you down there again? What's so damn interesting in that cellar? She went cold. Koa's eyes darted upward. I'm checking the grain, she called back, forcing her voice steady. Well, don't waste lantern oil, Jace Wilder grumbled, and his steps retreated. When silence returned, she exhaled, trembling. Koa reached for the lantern and turned the flame down low. You play with fire, he said quietly. She smiled in the dimness. Maybe. But sometimes fire keeps you alive. He watched her, the faint light glinting in his eyes. You are not afraid. Of you? She asked. He shook his head. Of what will come? Zara thought of the soldiers, her father's suspicion of how thin the wall was between what was right and what was allowed. She looked at the carved bird in her hand and whispered, I'm learning not to be. For a long time neither spoke. The night wind moved above them, whispering through the cracks, carrying the scent of distant rain. In that breathless dark, a fragile trust took root, something stronger than fear. Something both of them knew could destroy them, and yet somehow neither wanted to let go. The wind changed that week. It came down from the northern hills, dry and restless, carrying the smell of dust and the far-off promise of rain that never quite reached the ground. For Zara, the sound of it had become a companion. something that whispered through the cracks of her conscience, reminding her that every secret has a cost. By now the secret in the cellar was breathing stronger. Koa no longer looked like a dying man. The bruises on his face had faded to the color of old paper. He still moved carefully, keeping his weight off his left leg, but there was a new steadiness in his eyes. Sometimes Zara caught him standing near the window, his palm against the wood, as if he could feel the wind on the other side. One morning, before sunrise, she found him outside. He was by the barn, half in shadow, wearing one of her father's old shirts and the trousers she'd patched for him. He dragged himself out before dawn to mend the broken fence line working by starlight. "What are you doing?" she whispered, startled and angry all at once. He looked up, hammer in hand. "Fence is broken," he said simply. "You can't be out here," she scolded. "If my father sees you." Koa nodded toward the ridge where the first light was breaking. "No man wakes before the sun unless he's running from something," he said and kept working. Zara wanted to scold him, but the quiet strength in his movements stopped her. He worked with patience. Each nail struck clean and true. By the time the horizon burned orange, the fence stood straight again. Back inside, Zara Hayes hissed at Koa to stay below until night. He obeyed, though, with a faint smile that carried no regret. That evening she brought him food, and the argument turned into conversation. They talked about small things at first: how to cook corn without wasting salt, how to tell the weather by the smell of the air. Koa's English was rough, but his voice had a calmness to it, as if every word he spoke had already been tested by silence. He told her his people listened to the wind to hear what the world remembered. "When wind passes through canyons," he said, "it keeps the voices that were once there. You hear them if your heart is quiet." Zara smiled faintly. "And what do they say?" "They say we forget too easily," he answered. After that night, Zara began to listen differently to the wind rattling the barn door, to the hush of the prairie grass. It felt alive, carrying something she couldn't name. Days passed. Each one carried its own danger. Soldiers still rode through the valley now and then. Her father's mood had turned sharper, suspicion growing behind his eyes. He'd begun asking why she spent so much time near the house. "No chores down there worth doing," he said once, squinting at her. Zara laughed it off, her heart pounding. "Guess I like the quiet." But it was getting harder to hide. One evening, as thunderheads gathered over the far hills, she took supper to the cellar, a bowl of beans and cornbread, still warm. Koa sat cross-legged on the floor, whittling a piece of cedar into the shape of a feather. "You work too much," Zara said. "I can't sit still," he replied. "When I move, I remember who I am." Zara sat down beside him. "And who's that?" He didn't answer right away. "A man who still breathes," he said at last. Zara laughed softly, shaking her head. "That's not much of an answer. It's all that matters." Lightning flickered outside, sending brief veins of light through the cracks. They ate in silence for a while. Then Koa reached into his shirt and pulled out a small pouch, worn and tied with leather. He held it out to her. "Medicine bundle," he explained. "It has cedar, corn pollen, ash. It reminds me the earth still knows my name." She took it carefully, feeling the rough string between her fingers. "You trust me with this?" He met her gaze. "I trust what I see in your eyes." The thunder rolled closer. For a long time, neither of them spoke. When the first raindrops began to fall, Zara lifted her head, smiling. "Maybe we'll get a real storm tonight." Koa shook his head. "The skies are just pretending." He was right. The rain stopped after a few minutes, leaving only the smell of wet dust. That night, Zara dreamed of him, walking across a vast plain, wind swirling around him, his face hidden by the rising sun. When she woke, her heart was racing. The next morning brought new trouble. From the porch, she saw a column of riders on the ridge, army scouts. They were closer than before. Her father came in from the fields muttering curses. "Those bastards are sniffing around again." Heard one of them say the Apache might have passed this way. Jace Wilder shot her a hard look. "What'll they do if they find him?" he asked, his stomach turning to ice. "Same thing they do to all of them." When he went out to the barn, Zara ran to the cellar. Koa was already standing alert. "They come?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "You can't stay here anymore. They'll find you." He looked toward the trap door, then back at her. "Where would I go? Every direction is a rope waiting for my neck." She bit her lip, thinking fast. "There's a dry creek bed east of here. You can hide there until they pass." Koa smiled faintly. "You would send me away." "I'd rather lose you than watch them kill you," she said, her voice breaking. Koa stepped closer. The lantern light caught the curve of his cheek, the shadow of the scars near his temple. He reached out almost hesitantly and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. His fingers were rough, but the touch was careful. "You have a brave heart," he said quietly. "Too brave for this place." Her breath caught. "Then maybe it's time someone here learned how to use it." A sound outside, hoofbeats. Koa froze. Zara blew out the lantern, plunging them into darkness. Through the cracks came the murmur of voices. Soldiers again, their words indistinct but close. One of them laughed. Another said something about checking the barns. Zara gripped Koa's arm. "Stay here. Don't move." Zara Hayes climbed the steps and slipped out into the kitchen just as the front door banged open. Her father stood there with two soldiers, rain dripping from their hats. "Afternoon, ma'am," one of them said politely. "Just making rounds. Heard there was a bit of activity out this way." "Only kind of activity here's dust," Jace Wilder growled. "You're welcome to look if you like." Zara's heart sank. She forced a smile. "You won't find anything here, sir." The soldier's gaze swept the room. "We'll take a quick look at the barn, just to be sure." As they moved away, she exhaled shakily. 10 long minutes passed before they rode off again, leaving the smell of sweat and rain behind. That night, when the house finally settled into silence, Zara crept back to the cellar. Koa was waiting, tense, but unharmed. "They gone?" he asked. She nodded, leaning against the wall, exhausted. "For now," he said, studying her in the lantern glow. "You risk your life every day for me," he said softly. "Why?" She looked at him, her throat tight. Wrote, "Because every time I see you breathe, I remember my mother asking for water. I couldn't save her, but I can save you." For a long moment, they just stood there. The air between them, thick with something they both understood but didn't dare name. Then Koa raised his hand, touching the small carved feather lying on the table. "In my tongue," he said, "we have a word for wind that changes direction. It means hope." "What's the word?" she asked. He told her the syllables, low and musical. She tried to repeat it, stumbling over the sounds. He smiled, correcting her gently. When she finally said it right, he nodded once. "Now you'd carry it too." Outside, the wind shifted again, whistling through the eaves, and the house seemed to breathe with them. Two souls bound by a secret, waiting for a storm they both knew was coming. The air turned brittle in the days that followed, as if the whole prairie were holding its breath. Storm clouds gathered over the distant ridge, black and low, dragging shadows across the land. Even the horses grew restless. Something was coming. Zara could feel it in her bones. That morning, Jace Wilder woke in a foul mood. The well rope had snapped again, and a coyote had gotten into the chicken coop. Zara did her best to stay out of his way, but his temper had been short lately. He didn't like the way she drifted through her chores, distracted. "You spend half your time daydreaming," he muttered, slamming a pail onto the table. "This ranch don't run on clouds, girl." Zara bit back a reply. If he only knew what she dreamed about, what she risked every time she carried bread and water down to the cellar after dark. That afternoon, she was in the kitchen, kneading dough when a crack of thunder rolled through the valley. The first drops of rain hit the window pane, darkening the dust. She smiled to herself. Maybe the storm will hide my tracks for a while. She had just set the dough aside to rise when the door to the cellar creaked open behind her. Her heart froze. She hadn't opened it. Jace's voice came from below, muffled but clear. "What in blazes?" Zara called too quickly. "Don't!" But it was too late. His boots clumped on the cellar steps and the lantern light followed. Zara's breath came short as she hurried after him. Jace stood halfway down, lantern lifted high, staring at the figure crouched in the corner. Koa had risen instinctively, his body tense, eyes wide in the sudden light. The hammer he'd been using to fix a loose plank hung loosely in his hand. For a moment no one spoke. The rain drummed harder on the roof, the sound filling the space between them. Jace's face went white, then red. "Jesus Christ Almighty," he whispered. "You brought one into my house. Pa, listen." Zara stepped between them, her voice shaking. "You've lost your mind. You realize what'll happen if the soldiers find out. They'll string him up and us right beside him." Zara stepped closer to Koa. "He's not dangerous. He's a man, Pa, just like us." "Like hell he is," Jace barked. "Look at him. He's one of the bastards that burned Fort Halleck last spring." Koa said nothing. His jaw tightened, but he didn't know it. Zara saw in his eyes a single painful truth. He'd expected this moment from the beginning. "He's hurt," she said softly. "He would have died out there." "Should have," Jace spat. "That's the Lord's work, not yours." Lightning flashed through the cracks above, bleaching the room white. Jace's hand trembled around the lantern. "You'll bring ruin on us both, Thabet," he said. "I'll not be party to this." Jace Wilder stormed up the stairs, and Zara Hayes chased after him, catching his sleeve. "Please, Pa, he's done nothing to you." Jace turned his face hard as stone. "Nothing yet." And he shook her off and strode toward the bar. She stood frozen in the kitchen, trembling. Through the window she saw him mount his horse, rein whipping sideways across the yard. "No," she breathed. "Pa, don't." But he was already riding toward the ridge, toward the military outpost 5 miles east. Zara ran back down to the cellar, breathless. Koa had already gathered the few things he owned, the pouch, the carving, a length of rope. "He's gone for them," Zara said. "We have to leave." Koa's expression didn't change. "You can't come," he said quietly. "You won't make it alone. I've been alone all my life." She shook her head violently. "Not anymore." He looked at her, then really looked. "If you go with me, they'll call you traitor. They'll take everything from you." "They already have," she said. Outside, thunder crashed like a gunshot. They slipped out the back door, moving through sheets of rain. The land smelled of wet sage and lightning. Zara led him toward the dry creek bed east of the house, the one she'd mentioned before. It wound through the fields like a scar, deep enough to hide them for a while. But they didn't get far. Hoofbeats pounded behind them, more than one horse this time. Zara turned, lantern light glimmering through the rain. Her father's voice shouted above the storm. "Stop! You can't hide him!" Koa grabbed her hand, pulling her down into the creek bed. Mud splashed up their legs as they crouched beneath the bank. The horses drew closer. "Please," Zara whispered. "Don't hurt him." Koa touched her cheek briefly. "No more running," he said. Then he stood, rain streaming down his face, and stepped into the open. Jace reined in his horse, his rifle leveled. 2 soldiers flanked him. "On your knees, Apache!" one of them yelled. Koa lifted his hands slowly, palms out. "No fight," he said. His voice was steady, almost gentle. Zara climbed up beside them, tears mixing with rain. "He's not your enemy," she cried. "He's done nothing." Jace's jaw worked. "Zara, get away from him." "No." She moved closer to Koa, her hand gripping his arm. "If you take him, you take me too." The soldiers exchanged uneasy looks. One muttered something about crazy women and their savages. Jace lowered the rifle an inch. "You don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do," she said. "I'm saving what's left of my soul." And for a heartbeat, thunder and silence were the same sound. Then Jace fired not at Koa, but into the air. The crack split the night. "Enough!" he roared. "I'll not have my daughter hang for this." He turned to the soldiers. "He broke into my cellar. I was bringing him in myself. The girl she didn't know." The soldiers hesitated, uncertain. "You sure about that?" Jace glared at them. "You want paperwork? You'll get it in the morning. Now take him before the whole county dries up." They dragged Koa forward, finding his wrists. He didn't resist. He only looked back once at Zara. No words passed between them, just a look that said everything they couldn't. The soldiers hoisted him onto a horse and rode off into the storm. Jace grabbed Zara's arm and hauled her toward the house. Inside, he said, "Before you ruin us both." He locked her in her room, the key clicking like a gunbolt. Rain battered the windows, and through the roar she thought she heard a voice, a single haunting note like a flute carried on the wind. She pressed her palms against the door. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she didn't know whether she meant it for her father or for herself. Below, thunder rolled across the plains, fading toward the east, the same direction they'd taken Koa. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The world smelled clean again, scrubbed of all sound but the drip of rain from the eaves. Her father's voice drifted from the yard, low and weary, talking to someone she couldn't see. Said he broke in on his own. "Don't want trouble for the girl. She's young, foolish. I'll handle her." Then boots on the porch, the sound of men leaving. Zara sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the window. The clouds were breaking apart, strips of blue cutting through the gray. She'd kept him safe for as long as she could. Now he was gone, swallowed again, by a world that never forgave mercy. But Zara Hayes wasn't finished. Not yet. As the sun climbed over the hills, she rose, her jaw set with determination. Somewhere out there, beyond the river and the miles of wind, they were taking Koa toward the fort. She'd get to him no matter what her father or the law said. Because some debts couldn't be buried under rain, and some promises were stronger than fear, the road to the fort ran east through the valley, a thin scar of mud left behind by the night storm. By mid-morning, the air had turned bright and cruel again, the kind of heat that made the horizon dance. Zara rode her father's bay mare, hard, her braid whipping behind her like a flag of defiance. She hadn't told her father she was leaving. By the time he woke, she was already miles away, following the deep hoofprints of the soldiers who'd taken Koa. Her dress was soaked from the dew, her hands blistered from gripping the reins, but she didn't slow down. Every few minutes she whispered his name under her breath, like a prayer or a curse, she wasn't sure which. When she crested the ridge and saw the fort below, a square of timber walls, baked pale by the sun, her heart stuttered. 2 guards stood at the gate, rifles resting on their shoulders. Beyond them, she could see the flag hanging limp over the parade ground, the whitewashed barracks, the smell of sweat and gun oil riding the breeze. She urged the horse forward. "I need to see the commanding officer," she said as she approached. The older guard squinted at her. "Ma'am, this ain't visiting hours. State your business." "It's about the Apache prisoner brought in last night. You have him here, don't you?" He exchanged a look with the younger guard. "That's so. What's he to you?" Zara lifted her chin. "He's my husband." The words came out before she could think about them. They hung in the air like the crack of a rifle. The guards stared, dumbfounded. "Your husband," the older one repeated, half laughing. "Lady, that's a mighty strange thing to say." "I need to see the officer," she said again, her voice trembling but steady. After a long moment he sighed and waved her through. "You'll find Captain Thorne Blackwood in the details." The courthouse was little more than a wooden hall with benches and a desk. The air inside was thick with dust and tobacco smoke. Captain Thorne Blackwood sat behind the desk, sleeves rolled up, reading from a ledger. He was a big man with a scar down his cheek and eyes like river stones. "What's your business, miss?" he asked without looking up. Zara swallowed hard. "I'm here about the man you captured, the Apache." He looked up then, frowning. "You mean the prisoner awaiting trial?" "What's it to you?" She drew a shaky breath. "He's my husband." The captain leaned back slowly. "Is that a fact?" "Yes, sir." He studied her face, measuring the lie or the truth behind it. "How long you been married, Mrs. Hayes?" "We were wed last spring." "By whom?" She hesitated. "By Reverend Cole, out near Green River." The captain's brow arched. "There's no Reverend Cole stationed there." Her throat went dry. "He travels, doesn't stay in one place." Blackwood snorted. "You're a poor liar, Miss Hayes." He stood crossing his arms. "Now tell me what this is really about. You helping him escape, harboring him." "You understand, aiding a fugitive's, hanging offense?" Zara met his gaze, her voice breaking. "I don't care. He was dying when I found him. I gave him water, that's all. You call that a crime?" The captain's expression softened, but only slightly. "The army doesn't make exceptions, miss. The man you're talking about killed soldiers, maybe civilians. He's got to stand trial." "He killed no one," she said fiercely. "My father and I both know it." "Ask him," she added. "He told you himself the man broke in alone." Blackwood studied her a moment, then motioned toward the door. "Bring in the father." Jace Wilder entered moments later at an end, his face pale and drawn. When he saw Zara, his mouth tightened. "Lord help me, girl. What have you done?" She turned on him. "Tell them the truth, Pa. Tell them he can never hurt anyone." Jace looked from her to the captain, then to the window where the sunlight slanted in. "Captain," he said quietly, "my daughter's young, doesn't understand the world the way it is. The Apache did break into my cellar. I turned him in, as any man would." "Pa," he lifted a hand. "But she ain't wrong about one thing. He didn't raise a weapon. Could've, but didn't. Maybe that counts for something." Blackwood exhaled. "Not enough to set him free." Zara Hayes' pulse roared in her ears. "Then take me instead," she said suddenly. "If it's a hanging you want, hang me too. Because I saved him and I'd do it again." The room went still. Even her father stared stunned. Captain Thorne Blackwood rubbed a hand over his jaw. "You realize what you're saying, miss?" "Yes, I won't deny him. He's my husband." Her father's voice broke rough with disbelief. Zara forgot all her fears, but she pressed on. "You can call me foolish, wicked, or whatever you want, but I know what's right. I gave him water because he was human, because he was alive, and because someone once refused that kindness to my mother. If that's a crime, then I'll wear the rope myself." The silence afterward felt endless. Finally the captain sighed and sat back in his chair. "You got fire, I'll give you that." He looked at Jace Wilder. "Mr. Wilder, you willing to vouch for this young lady's marriage?" Jace's jaw worked. "If I say no, what happens? She'll be charged as an accomplice. The Apache will hang at dawn." He stared at the floor for a long time, then lifted his head. "Then I'll vouch. The marriage stands." Zara turned to him, eyes wide. "Pa." He didn't meet her gaze. "I'll not watch my only child die for pity's sake. If the law says they're married, then that's what they are." Blackwood nodded. "Fine. The court recognizes the union. The prisoner's life is bound to hers. He'll serve his time as labor under Mr. Wilder's supervision." Bitter relief hit Zara so hard she nearly stumbled. "You mean he's free?" she asked, voice trembling. "Free enough," Blackwood said. "But if he so much as breathes wrong, he's back in chains." Jace placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. You got what you wanted, girl. Don't make me regret it. Outside, the sun burned low over the plains. Soldiers led Koa from the holding shed, his wrists still bound. When he saw Zara standing there, tears shining on her face, his expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. Like the wind easing after a long storm. Blackwood cut the rope around his wrists. "You're free to go, Apache," he said. "Don't give me reason to change my mind." Koa nodded once, then looked at Zara. "You came," he said quietly. She reached for his hand. "I said I would." Jace watched them in silence. The captain turned away, muttering about paperwork, leaving the three of them standing in the dusty courtyard. For the first time, Zara felt the weight of what she'd done, not regret, but awe. She'd stood against the law, fear, and blood. And somehow she'd won him back. Her father cleared his throat. "Let's go home," he said gruffly. "Storm's done, but the road's still long." As they rode west, the sun fell behind the hills, three silhouettes against a blood-orange sky: the farmer, his daughter, and the man she'd refused to let die. And though no one spoke, the air between them carried something fragile and new, like the calm after lightning. Not forgiveness yet, but the beginning of it. By the time they reached the homestead, dusk had already settled across the prairie. The world smelled of wet sage and horses of earth cooling after the heat. Zara rode ahead, her back straight, though she hadn't slept in 2 days. Behind her came her father, silent and grim. And Koa riding bareback on the bay mare with nothing but a borrowed coat around his shoulders. The ranch looked smaller than she remembered. The porch sagged, the fence leaned, and the windmill creaked like an old man muttering to himself. Yet when they stopped at the gate, Zara felt something shift inside her, a strange peace like a storm that had finally spent itself. Her father dismounted without a word and led the horse into the barn. "Get him water," he said curtly, "and food. We'll talk after." Zara helped Koa down. His body was stiff from the ride, but he didn't complain. Inside the kitchen, the smell of wood smoke and old bread wrapped around them like a memory. She set a bowl of stew in front of him and waited. He ate slowly, each motion deliberate, as if he weren't sure the food was real. When he finished, he looked up at her. "You saved me again," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "You make a habit of needing it." Koa's eyes softened. "And you'd make a habit of giving it." Outside, Jace's boots thudded on the porch. He entered, rain dripping from his hat brim. He stood in the doorway, studying the two of them. For a long time, no one spoke. Finally, Jace Wilder spoke, his voice low. "The captain gave me papers. Says you'll work off your debt here. My land, my rules. Understand?" Koa nodded once. "I understand." Jace poured himself a cup of coffee and stared into it. "I lost 2 horses to buy your freedom, Apache. Don't make me regret it." "I will not," Koa said simply. Zara Hayes looked between them, her heart tight. She could feel the wall still standing between the two men. Old anger, older grief. But something in her father's tone had changed. It wasn't hate anymore. It was weariness. Over the next weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Koa rose before dawn, working the land with a quiet patience that made even the stubborn soil seem willing. He fixed the barn door, dug new irrigation ditches, and found a hidden spring on the north slope. The day he struck water, Jace stood beside him, watching the muddy trickle turn clear. "You sure about that vein?" he asked. Koa knelt, cupping the water in his hands. "It runs deep," he said. "Like truth, you don't always see it. But it's there." Jace didn't answer. But later that evening, he left a clean shirt folded on Koa's cot. He didn't speak of it, and Koa didn't thank him. Some understandings didn't need words. Zara watched the change from the edges of her chores. She saw the way her father began to pause, before barking orders, how he started asking instead of commanding. She saw how Koa, once quiet as stone, began to hum while he worked low tunes that sounded like wind over mountains. One afternoon, when the sun was high, she found them mending a fence together. Jace held the wire while Koa hammered the post. The rhythm of their labor was steady, almost companionable. When they finished, Jace straightened and wiped his brow. "You ever build something that lasts?" he asked. Koa nodded toward the horizon. "A lodge once burned down before winter." Jace grunted. "That's the way of things out here. Everything burns, sooner or later." "Not everything," Koa said. "Some things grow back stronger." That night they shared supper at the same table for the first time. Jace poured whiskey into 3 cups. "To hard work," he said gruffly. Zara lifted her cup. "To second chances." Koa raised his to water that does not run dry. The clink of tin cups sounded like something sacred. Spring came early that year. The land softened and green began to show between the rocks. Zara planted a new row of corn while Koa turned the soil with her father's old plow. The air carried the scent of life, returning the same wind that had once carried only dust. But peace, she knew, was a fragile thing. Rumors reached them from the nearby town, more raids, more soldiers riding out. The war between settlers and Apache hadn't ended, only paused. One afternoon, a rider came from the east, a soldier she recognized from the fort. Jace met him by the gate. The man dismounted, handed over a folded letter, and then said something Zara couldn't hear. Her father read it, then crumpled the paper in his fist. When he came inside, his face was pale. "They're rounding up Apaches again," he said. "Army wants all freed prisoners accounted for. Captain Thorne Blackwood himself is coming this way." Zara's heart dropped. "They'll take him." Jace's jaw clenched. "Not if I can help it." At dawn, Blackwood rode in with 3 men. He greeted Jace with a stiff nod. "Regulations, Wilder. I've got orders to reclaim all escapees. The council's tired of these loose ends." Jace met his gaze. "That man's no fugitive. He's working for me, earning his place." Blackwood frowned. "Paper says otherwise." His tone was calm but resolute. "If you must take me, I will not fight." Zara moved beside him. "You'll have to take me too." Blackwood hesitated, looking from her to her father. "You still call him your husband, miss?" "I do," she said. "By God and by my own choice." Jace's voice came low and steady. "He's part of this land now, Captain. You take him. You'll have to shoot me first." For a long moment the only sound was the wind sighing through the dry grass. Then Blackwood exhaled. "Damn this war," he muttered. "Keep him. But if Washington asks, he's dead. Understood?" Jace nodded. "Understood." The soldiers turned and rode off, leaving the 3 of them standing in the fading light. That night, Jace sat on the porch, a pipe glowing between his fingers. "Guess I made my choice," he said quietly. "Don't reckon the army will be so forgiving next time." Zara leaned against the post looking at him. "I know." "Why'd you do it, Pa?" Zara Hayes stared out at the horizon where the moon was rising over the hills. "Because that man saved my life. Twice." Her heart skipped a beat. "Twice." She blinked. Jace Wilder nodded, his eyes distant. "Found me near the creek last week, spooked. I'd have broken my neck if he hadn't been there. Didn't tell you. Didn't seem to matter." He looked at her then, and for the first time she saw no anger in his eyes, only tired affection. "I misjudged him. Misjudged you too. Maybe the world's not as simple as I wanted it to be." He tapped his pipe out against the rail. "Come morning, we'll do it proper. No soldiers, no lies. Just a small ceremony right here. I'll be damned if my daughter lives half married to a man who's earned his place." The next day the sky cleared. Zara wore her mother's faded blue dress. Jace stood by the well with a Bible in one hand and a trembling smile on his face. Koa took her hands in his. "The wind brought me to you," he said softly. "It will carry us wherever we go." She smiled through her tears, letting them flow freely. Jace cleared his throat. "By the laws of this territory and the grace of the Almighty," he said, "I declare you husband and wife. May you always find water when the world runs dry." When it was done, the three of them stood together, watching the sunlight dance on the bucket that hung from the well rope. The wind rose warm and steady, rippling the tall grass. It carried the faint sound of a flute, Koa's flute, singing to the open sky. And for the first time in a long while, the wilder land felt alive again. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. If you felt the breath of the Old West in this tale, its wind, its dust, and its quiet compassion, please subscribe. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to know which moment of the story spoke to your heart the most. See you again in the next story. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deep-fake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work